credibility does take time, and I don't think you can shortcut that. I can say, I know it works well because I did it last week in my classroom. He said, you're still thinking as a teacher. You're going into the business side of it. You got to think from the business perspective. Know your value, and that's the hardest thing.
This is the Education Business Podcast for all founders and business owners in the education sector. This podcast is for you if you have an education business or you're thinking about starting one. That could be tutoring, publishing, holiday clubs. It really doesn't matter. You're in business and you're also in education. But most of all, you're focused on improving outcomes for children in the way you know best, through your business. I'm Claire Riley, co-founder of educational resources website Classroom Secrets, and I'll be sharing how to make your education business bigger, better, and have more impact through my own experiences and also the conversations I have with other founders and business owners in education. The Education Business Podcast is sponsored by Classroom Secrets, helping you to support your children's learning. Simon, welcome to the Education Business Podcast. It's lovely to talk to you from an education business perspective rather than just an education perspective, as we did on the Teachers Podcast many moons ago. But I recently bumped into you at BET. It was great to have a catch up, and I thought it'd be great to just share your story and have a chat to you about what you're doing in education business, because you're still in the classroom, but you have these things on the side that you're doing. You know, you're working with partners, and let's talk about that, because I think, you know, I would probably describe you as maybe a teacher influencer. This is a kind of business that you can have in the education space. Tell me how you got into teaching, you know, the first time that you started working maybe with an education business or a company. How has that evolved to the point where now, when we're at BET, you're working with Kahoot? How did that unfold for you?
Hi, Claire. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me back onto your podcast, because it's actually been, I think it's about 5 or 6 years since we last spoke, and I feel like so much has happened since then. And actually, when you invited me on this podcast, it was quite nice to sort of reflect on what has happened within those past 5 or 6 years. So I'll start with teaching. I was quite late into teaching. I didn't start teaching until I was nearly 30. And I went to York University, York St. John, when I was about 21, 22. Finished my course, just did a sports science degree, just something I enjoyed. Then I took a year out, and then that year became 2, became 3, became 4. And before I knew it, I was nearly 30, and I still wasn't happy in a job that I wanted to do. So I thought back to when I was a kid, because I was really, really shy at school, at primary school especially. And Mrs. Parker, my teacher in year 6, was the first person to notice me and spot me. And she really brought me out of my shell. And I've always remembered her and the impact that she had on me. So I thought, well, maybe I could be someone's Mrs. Parker and do something similar for a child. And I've always enjoyed kind of working with young kids, being creative and finding something that sort of fits my personality. And I'm kind of a big kid myself as well, actually. So I did my teaching degree down in London for a year, qualified when I was 29, and then I came back up to Manchester and decided I'll do supply for a year just to sort of see what year group I would want to go into. So I did supply for a year, which was great fun because I got to go into different classes, different places around the Greater Manchester area. And then from there, I got a job in year 6 in Bolton, taught in Bolton for about 5 years. And then I've been in year 3, 4 in Tottington Primary now since it's about 2018. So that's kind of my teaching journey. Now, when I first got into teaching, I thought, well, you know, you become a teacher, you might like lead a subject, then you become a deputy head, then you might become a head, and then you retire, and then that's your cycle of a teacher. But when I started teaching, I realised that I didn't really want to go into the deputy and head side. That doesn't really fit what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something different, but I wasn't quite sure what was out there. Which brings me to how I ended up doing what I do now. So I fell into it by accident, really. So I started posting things online of things that worked well for me. And the reason why is because I saw other people posting lessons and ideas, how it worked well for them. And I thought, well, if I can do something similar with the way I teach and the things that I've done in class, and if a teacher somewhere in the world sees a video or sees an idea that I've, shared online that they can then use in their classroom, it helps them out and it helps the kids ultimately that they teach, then it'd be worth it. So I started posting my ideas and my thoughts online, and it kind of grew from there. And then the sort of influencer side of it, I'm a teacher first. I wouldn't call myself an influencer. I'm just a teacher that posts things, and that's kind of what's worked for me. With the more sort of following I got and the more that people would share my videos, I was then getting sort of companies saying, have you looked at this resource, or have you tried this resource? And I think the hardest thing for me was I've always been a teacher, and in my first few years of teaching, sharing ideas, I do those teach meets. If you remember those teach meets when you do like 10 minutes talk about something you've done in class, and I was doing those, and I was going to different places doing those for free basically. So the hardest thing is, from teaching side of it, you have your teacher head on. And I remember speaking to Damien, who owns Nexus Education, and I said to him, I've been offered these opportunities from different companies. Some are offering to pay, and personally, I didn't want to tell these businesses that, if you've given us free resources, we're struggling with glue sticks here, I'm not going to ask to be paid for stuff like this. And he said, well, you need to stop what you're doing there. He said, you're still thinking as a teacher. You're kind of going into the business side of it. You got to think from the business perspective. He said, know your value. He said, there's reasons why different companies are contacting you. It's not by accident. They obviously like what you do. They like who you are, your personality, the way you sort of portray yourself and the way you share things. Know your value. And that's the hardest thing, because, I've worked with different companies. I've worked with Kahoot. I've worked with HP. I've worked with Google. I've worked with lots of different companies who contact me and say, we've got this product, we've got this resource. And I would always say that anything that I've used or shared online is something that I would use myself. And I think that's my true value. It's because these companies sometimes have these resources, have these websites, have this software, and they need it actually being used in the classroom. And I think that's what I can give. I use things in the classroom. And when I talk about a certain resource or a certain thing, I can say, I know it works well because I did it last week in my classroom, or this is something I'm using right now. So that's kind of how I've gone into the business side of it. And what's been really nice, and for any teachers out there thinking that, these opportunities can't help, they might not necessarily happen for you. I didn't think it would either, to the point that a couple of years ago, I got contacted by BBC Education asking to work with them in the BBC 500 Words. And I've done some sort of consultancy for them, worked with them, got to meet loads of really interesting people. I got to go to Buckingham Palace last year as well, which was the most surreal thing, that because of something that I've done in class and some ideas that I've shared online, I was able to end up in Buckingham Palace. It was an amazing experience, but that's kind of how I fall into it. And as a side thing as well, about 4 years ago, we were having a chat at the end of the day with my class about what they want to be when they're older. And, that 10 minutes when you're kind of getting your coats and bags ready, you've got to fill a bit of time before the children leave. And one of the children said to me, Mr. Hunt, what do you want to be when you're older? Which I thought was a really quite deep question. So I said, well, I'd love to write a book one day. I'd love to be an author. So then they basically challenged me to write a story. They said, Mr. Hunt, you're always telling us we can do this, this and this. Then why don't you try to become an author too? So that's what I decided to do. And at the time, my daughter, Delilah, she was in reception and she loved silly and disgusting stories. But most silly and disgusting stories that she reads tended to have a boy as the main character. So I thought, well, I'll write one with her as the main character, doing something disgusting she does, which is she picks her nose all the time. She still does, actually. And she'll hate me saying that, but she does. And I made her Delilah Rose, the bogey princess. And I written a story about that, found an illustrator, found different people to help me how to get a book together. And eventually I've gone to schools for the past 4 years, reading my stories, sharing ideas. And also I've written a second book called Billy the Bottom Burping Pirate, where I've gone to schools all over the country talking about, how to become an author, the process or the writing process. And I show them when I go to schools, things that made the book, things that didn't. That's kind of where I am now. And what's really nice is that as a teacher, I always tell my kids, you can do these things, you can have these aspirations. And the nice thing is now when I talk to my class or the schools that I go to, I say, well, if I can do this, then anyone can. Because I've literally got evidence of me going to different places. Like I met you in London, and a few months before that, I was in Trondheim, which is kind of the northern area of Norway, doing a session there on a stage. And I never thought these things would be possible, but they are. And I'd say one of the biggest bits of advice is what Damien said, is know your value. Know, there's reasons why you've been given these opportunities. It's that imposter syndrome that people have, and I have that myself. But he said, just do it. And that's what I did. I went down to 4 days and 3 days part-time. And I've had these opportunities, and who knows what's going to happen in the future as well.
I loved catching up on that, having a bit of a recap and also finding out the bits that I didn't know. I think, that point from Damien is true, isn't it? You have to know your value, but two questions for you based on that. One, how do you figure out what your value is? And two, when you started sharing things online, not as many people were doing it then as are doing it now. I think now we have more of this understanding that we can turn things into money. Do you think that there are steps you have to take before you try and turn things into money? Do you think there are people who are trying to turn their social media accounts into money before they should? Are they trying to sort of sell it before they've got the experience kind of thing? Because you obviously built yours from a place of, free, a place of giving, and then that turned into income because you help people. But do you think there is this sense now where not everybody, but some people are kind of doing it for the income, but maybe they don't have the same heart to help people in the beginning, and perhaps that does actually affect the sales. I don't know. But do you think that's a thing?
I think it's such an important question because if I'm honest, I really struggled with the money side of it at first. As teachers, we're not trained to price it ourselves. We're trained to teach. So when Damien said to me, know your value, I didn't immediately know what he meant by that sort of in practical terms. However, over time, I've realised my value isn't followers or numbers. It's the fact that I'm a practicing classroom teacher. And if I talk about something, I can genuinely say that I used this last week with year 3 and how it went. I think that lived experience is what companies are actually interested in. They don't just want like ads and promotion. They want really sort of valuable insight. But the most awkward bit is when someone says to me, how much would you charge for this? And there's always that little pause when I think, right, what are they expecting me to say? I really wish they would sometimes just tell me the budget and we'd work from there. Because I'm very confident in a classroom and teaching, but pricing myself is just a completely different skill that I'm still learning. So the way I approach it is I look at how long something will realistically take me. Not just the filming or the speaking, but the prep, the thinking time, the follow-up. I also think about how interested I am in the project. I consider the size of the company. So if you've got a small company or a global organization, they're not in the same position. So you've got to factor that in as well. And I've spoken to other people in education business to figure out cost and pricing, and that's helped massively because you get to speak to people who work in business and get a different perspective too. So when I dropped down to 4 days, I made it really simple in my head. So my goal wasn't to build this huge epic empire. It was just to replace that 1 day salary across the year. And if I could cover that, brilliant. And anything else was just a bonus. But what actually happened is that I gained so much more than just money on income. I gained time actually. I got time with my family. I got to go to assemblies and do the kids drop off and pick up, which I'd never really had a chance to do before. I got time to think, and honestly, some of those days have been worth more than any invoice I've sent. And I've had to turn down some quite lucrative opportunities because they just didn't sit with me. And if I wouldn't use something in my own classroom, then I couldn't justify promoting it just because it pays well. Although it's very difficult to say no to certain things. So if I'm honest, the biggest value hasn't been financial. It's been the people that I've managed to meet, the conversations I've had, the relationships. I've met teachers in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. I've seen different systems, different approaches. And every single time I go somewhere or work with someone new, I come back with a completely different perspective and insight as well. And the really important part for me is bringing that back into my own school. So I talk to the children all the time about what I do, and they love listening and finding out where I've been and what I've been doing. And they know that if I've spoken somewhere or worked with something and that they see their teacher as still learning and doing things a little bit different. In fact, they've always been my biggest supporters. Honestly, it's really fun when I come back from somewhere, they're just dead interested in everything. Like, Mr. Hunt, where did you go? Or they always ask random things like, oh, what was your breakfast like? Take a photo of your breakfast. Or what was the hotel like? Was it a big room? Was it a small room? How many people did you speak to? And they're just really, really interested in, everything I do. And that's been across the years, not just this year or the year before. Ever since I've been doing these extra things outside of school, I found the children are always dead interested, and it's really nice to share it with them as well. But beyond that, there've been some real benefits for schools. So we've had access to opportunities and resources that we just as a school wouldn't be able to afford them. And it's invaluable because it directly impacts the kids that are in our school as well. But none of these things over the past few years and the opportunities would have happened without the support of the school and the staff and the teachers and the kids that I work with. because they've trusted me, they've given me flexibility. So I work 4 days a week, and I sometimes move that day around. I have a Thursday or Friday, or I'll move it to a Monday if I'm going somewhere, or if I'm going somewhere for a few days, I'll block them out. And what's really nice is the other teacher that's me, Mrs. Chapman, that's in our class. She's amazing, and she's very flexible as well, which really helps, because I always say, oh, can we swap this day? Or she'll say, can we swap this day? And if it works for her, it works for me as well. So my school have really trusted me, and they've seen the things I do outside of school as something that can come back into our school community, and it's not just something that benefits me personally. But going back to the point that you mentioned before about monetizing earlier, I don't think there's anything wrong with teachers earning from their expertise or their talent or what they can do, because teachers should be valued. But I do think that credibility does take time, and I don't think you can shortcut that, because I really believe that teachers can tell very quickly if something feels genuine or if it feels like a setup or an ad. But for me, it started with what worked well in my classroom, and that I just wanted to help other teachers, other people, and there was not a business plan behind it. And the income and the opportunities that I've had have come later. And it's all kind of followed in a natural progression that's been really interesting, because, like I said before, when I first started teaching, I didn't think any of this was possible, but it is.
Do you teach children as part of your business offering? Have you considered using resources from Classroom Secrets? At Classroom Secrets, we're always adding new resources for a range of subjects, and we're keen to hear your suggestions for resources too. We know that you didn't go into business to work more hours than you did in the classroom. You went into business to give you freedom. Let us help with that. Visit classroomsecrets.co.uk to sign up.
Want to bring up a really important word that you said, trust. My school trusted me. You said that to me on the teachers podcast, however many years ago it was, like 6-7 years ago. And I got the same feeling from Lee Parkinson, Mr. PICT, that he was also trusted. School trusted him to do things outside of school and make sure that, you know, he didn't bring the school into disrepute and that it would be helpful. And I think that's rare. I think, you know, if somebody might want to become a teacher influencer, as it were, they can have that barrier. I know of somebody who recently has to now film their videos at home and can't use the school. Now, I don't know the circumstances of that, but I would say that's more normal. How important do you think trust has been, school trusting you, to your success and believing that you could make more of this?
So from very early on, my school, they trusted me. And I know that's something I'm going to be eternally grateful for. And when you work in a school, you're part of a community. So it's never just about you building something on the side. It's about representing the school too. There's no secrecy about what I do, and I discuss things with them openly. My main priority is always going to be my teaching job first and the school. But the biggest thing before anything else is the children. So whenever a company gets in touch or an opportunity comes up, the first question I ask myself is really, really simple. Okay, I think, does this benefit the children I teach or the school I work in? If the answer is no, then I just won't do it. And the SLT, they know that, and they know I'm not just saying yes to everything that comes across my desk or my computer or whatever. They know that the school will always come first. But with what I do outside of school, there have been lots of real benefits in school as well. So we've had access to opportunities, resources that we just wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise. We've made connections, we've tried new things, new resources, had amazing visitors. And that's huge, because ultimately it's the children who gain from it. Now, with the SLT, there's always been an open, honest conversation over the years about my own career. So deputy headship or headship has not really been the path I've been drawn to. I think I said this to you last time we spoke, like years ago, so that's not really changed. Although I'd never say never, but I just don't think that's my path. And my school have recognised this. And instead of pushing me down that traditional route, they've supported me in exploring different opportunities while still being based in the classroom. And that support from the leadership and staff has meant that I've been able to grow professionally without feeling like I have to leave our school to do it. And I'm genuinely grateful for that, because like you said earlier, I know that's not the norm. And I do think there's an important e-safety point too in all this, because a lot of time we talk to the children about the internet as if it's this really scary, dangerous place. And yeah, there's obviously the children need to know and understand the risk, but they also need to see that it can be used positively as well. If they see their teacher using it responsibly, collaborating, sharing ideas, creating opportunities, then they see both sides of it too, and they learn it's not just something to be scared of. is something that can be really, really positive too. So for me, trust has been the foundation of everything I do, and my school have always been my main priority.
There's a lesson there for school leaders as well, isn't there? Recognizing when somebody doesn't want to progress up the ladder in terms of leadership, but maybe wants to do something more than just being in the classroom. And in some ways, it's helping you stay in the classroom by working with you to do these other things and pursue a bigger difference, I think, probably in your case. If somebody wants to get into teacher influencing, which, and I know you'll probably hate the fact that I've called it that, say somebody wants to do what you do, what should they do in the next 30 days to get started?
The first thing I'd advise is don't start with the idea of becoming an influencer. I know that sounds obvious, but if that's your starting point, you're already kind of off track already. So initially, I'd say get really clear on what you enjoy and what you genuinely care about. So what's the thing in your classroom or your school that works really well for you? And what do other teachers ask you about? So what's the thing that you naturally, when you're in the staff room, what do you naturally start talking about, or what ideas do you share in the staff room? And I'd say that's your starting point. And then I'd say just to start sharing. It doesn't really need to be polished or overproduced. In fact, those super polished, ultra 4K edited videos with super clear sound, I don't think they feel authentic because they're almost too perfect. And classrooms, as you know, Claire, and teaching is not perfect. I think people connect much more with something that is real. So share something that worked well, explain why and how, and don't just keep it online. I'd say get out there locally as well. Go to teach meets or offer to share a 10-minute idea that works well in your classroom. That could be in a teach meet, or it could be in a staff meeting or in the staff room. I think those opportunities are huge. They really build confidence, your credibility, and they help you to learn to articulate what you do well. I did loads of those teach meets early on, and there was no money involved. It was just sharing something that worked well in my classroom and in my school. And I think that experience was invaluable. And I actually think social media and local sharing should sort of run alongside each other. Post online, but also speak in real rooms, because when you stand up in front of other teachers and explain an idea, you get that instant feedback. But also what's really nice is you get to see and meet other speakers and teachers too. And I'd say be consistent rather than loud. You don't need to go viral. You just need to show up regularly, comment on other people's posts, engage properly, and build those relationships. And it's really, really important to keep your school in the loop from the start. So be transparent, make it clear that your priority is still going to be the children and the school that you work at. And the other thing is, don't think about money in those first 30 days. Focus on adding value, your credibility. If you start with helping, that builds a really solid foundation. And even if it never turns into anything beyond sharing ideas, you become a more reflective teacher, because you'll think more deeply about what you're doing and why, because you're explaining it to others. And I think that alone makes you a better teacher. And it's such a useful experience to be able to share your thoughts and ideas with other people's and learn from other people as well. So for me, it's really simple. I'd say get clear on your strengths, share honestly, speak locally, be consistent, connect with people, and then take it from there.
That's really well documented advice as well, isn't it? Make sure that you're giving value, because money flows from value creation. So if you're not adding something of value first and not wanting to help, you can't really expect the money to flow afterwards. And I think I've certainly found that to be true in different things that I've tried as well. Question for you. So we've got lots of people who listen to this podcast, especially smaller businesses in the education sector. What have you learned from big brands when working with them as an influencer that could help smaller brands in education? It could be general, or it could be on how to work with an influencer. How do they work with influencers? And how could that help smaller businesses work with really brilliant influencers without maybe having to spend an absolute fortune because their budgets don't match the big companies?
It's a really interesting one, because working with bigger brands has definitely been an eye-opener for me as a teacher. So when you used to teacher budgets being tight and counting glue sticks and whiteboard pens and, sometimes using your own money to buy things, counting every single pound, and then you step into a world where you have companies that have got full marketing teams, budgets, acronyms, the things that I'm not quite sure what they mean, and that all these things set aside for campaigns. It can seem a bit surreal, and you realise that they're very clear on what they want, and they're very strategic, and they're very good at the sort of the business side of it. But sometimes the bigger the company, the further they're away from the classroom. I've seen this quite often, and they're brilliant at sales and positioning, but they don't always fully understand what a Tuesday afternoon in year 3 after a wet play and a little fallout at lunchtime actually looks like. And I think that's where working with like teachers really matters. It's not just about promotion, it's about translation and translating the product into a real classroom sort of life. And for smaller companies, I think it's a huge opportunity, because quite often started by ex-teachers like yourself, Claire, or people who are genuinely have a care about solving a problem or something in education. Now, they might not have like massive budgets, but they often have a passion and they're closer to the reality of schools. And actually, just yesterday, I actually met up with someone called Stephen Rhodes, who's a teacher with a great idea. He's very passionate and he understands the classroom. I'm looking to work with him over the next few months and possibly at a longer term as well. And from my point of view, the best collaborations, whether they're big or small, they don't start with how much for a post. They start with that honest conversation. Tell me what you're trying to solve. Let's see it. Let me give my honest feedback. Let's be open to tweaking it, because most teachers who share online don't just want to advertise something. They want to shape and make it better. And that's where the real value is. And from my point of view, the best collaborations, whether they're with huge companies or smaller companies, they come down to whether it actually grabs me, whether it grabs my attention, whether it makes me think, right, would I use this in my classroom? Does it feel relevant? Is it something I'd actually be excited to be part of? And because of this, everything else for me has always felt easier. And I'm not trying to force it or make it fit. It's just something that works naturally. And I think it's important to have a genuine fit rather than something you're just being asked to promote just because they might pay well. Yeah, the bigger companies, they often pay more. That is just the reality of things, but it can feel strange as a teacher, getting your head around that. But it's a completely different financial world. Smaller companies don't need to compete on money alone. They can compete on the relationship, the collaboration, on building something together over time. And I've worked with smaller organizations where, we've almost grown alongside each other. And there's something really powerful about that. You feel invested. And if that business does take off, you've been part of that journey as well. And it goes back to what you said earlier about value. If a product or something genuinely helps teachers and children, and that relationship you have with that company or person feels authentic, for me, the money part tends to work itself out more naturally.
I think you've just shared one of the most valuable insights that anyone's ever shared on the podcast. And we've heard it from different places, but we're hearing it from somebody who could call themselves an influencer, even though I know you don't want to. But basically what you're saying is, yeah, money's a factor, but what's more important is being involved and being able to shape it into something that really, really works. And I think we can forget that. We can forget how important that is, that teachers want to help shape a product because they want it to really work, like they will buy in. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing that. Simon, I've loved this conversation. I feel like we should catch up more. In your mind, what have we not talked about that education business owners should know?
First off, thanks for that, Claire. I really, really do appreciate talking to you today. And honestly, it's kind of made me reflect on things that have happened so far and kind of where I want to go next, really. Because you talk things through and you think, yeah, some things went well, some things that adjust. And even now I'm thinking differently, which is always a good sign. Now, if there's one thing, going back to your question, that education businesses should know is that teaching can be really, really tough. It is rewarding, don't get me wrong, but it's full on. So when there's something that genuinely helps, so when a company truly listens to teachers or goes that extra step, it is noticed, and that makes a huge, huge difference. And when teachers feel appreciated, it gives them that little extra enthusiasm. And that doesn't matter whether it's a huge company or a small one. When teachers feel seen, when someone understands the challenges and is trying to solve a real problem that helps teachers and children, that's the part we don't forget. And it's not just about the tool itself, it's the fact that someone really gets what we do and the challenges that we have. And we do notice that. And when that happens, everything else just feels more meaningful.
Occasionally I get those episodes that are useful for everyone who works in education business to listen to, not just the founders. And this for me is one of those episodes. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you for listening to the Education Business Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Classroom Secrets. To find more resources to grow your business, visit classroomsecrets.co.uk.